Today's video is all about the characteristics of a scatter plot. So you see we have two here. On the left, we have age and pets owned. So the person's age is your X versus the number of pets owned. And when we look at this graph, do you see anything that looks like a pattern? Do you see a linear, a non-linear? I don't see a pattern. I just see a bunch of dots and I don't see it going in any direction. So because this is non-linear, we typically don't see many of the characteristics that we do see in a linear representation, which is the television size and price. So as the television size increases, you notice the price also tends to increase, and that makes sense. The larger the TV, typically the more it costs. So this is a linear representation. Now, when we talk about linear representations or trends that are being positive or negative, there are some key words. One is an outlier. Now remember, an outlier is a point that differs significantly from the trend of the data or lies outside of the field of play. So in this particular graph, if I was to look for the outlier, I'm like, well, which point doesn't seem to be where it should be? Which one's out of place? And it would be this one right here, right? There's your outlier. Other keywords we might need to know is a gap, or holes or empty areas where no data is reported. So it kind of looks like it skips. So if you notice, we kind of have a gap right here. It kind of skipped over when it was making the line. So I can call this a gap. And the last part here is clusters, or a group of data points within a small interval, meaning right kind of close to each other, right on top of each other. So like right here, we could call this a cluster. So those are the keywords that you will need to know when you're working through your practice. The outlier is the one that's outside of the trend. The gap is if you have a space or a skip. And a cluster is when it kind of gets grouped up together. Some other really cool things to think about is when we're talking about positives and negatives, we can also talk about them as strong. We sometimes use moderate, but we usually either go strong or weak. The closer the points are to making a straight line, the closer the points are to making a straight line, the stronger the positive or the stronger the negative. So we talk about correlation, we talk about associations. If they're really close to making a line, we call that a strong positive or a strong negative, depending on their direction. But when they're away from it, although they tend to kind of be working that direction, they tend to be, so if I'm looking here, they are going up the hill, but if I look at drawing a line through the middle, they're not very close to the line. This would be a weak, what we call a weak positive. So it's just some good information you might need to know in an upcoming activity.